The mechanic who wouldn't quit, Jake Martinez, wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. Probably around the time humans first set foot on Mars, the maintenance bay of Europa Station hummed with the constant background noise of life support systems, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. For the past 18 months, this cramped workshop had been his entire world. Martinez, my office. Now, the voice belonged to Commander Sarah Chen, and her tone suggested this wasn't a social visit. Jake sighed and set down his plasma torch. The atmospheric processor he'd been repairing would have to wait. Again, he made his way through the narrow corridors of the station, nodding to the few crew members he passed. Europa Station wasn't large, housing only about 300 people, but it was humanity's most important research outpost in the outer solar system. Commander Chun's office was barely large enough for 2 people, but she'd managed to cram in a desk, 2 chairs, and enough paperwork to stock a small library. She looked up as Jake entered, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. "Sit down, Jake. We need to talk." Jake settled into the uncomfortable chair across from her desk. "If this is about the recycling unit in Sector 7, I told you I need at least 3 more days to get the parts fabricated. It's not about the recycling." Unit Chen pulled up a holographic display showing Jake's work schedule. "When was the last time you took a day off?" Jake shrugged. "I don't know. Last month. Maybe the month before. Try 18 months ago." Chun's voice carried the weight of authority. "You haven't taken a single day of leave since you arrived on this station. The regulations are clear. Mandatory rest periods exist for a reason. Commander, with respect, I don't need a vacation. There's too much work to do. The water filtration system is making that grinding noise again, and the backup generators need a complete overhaul before the next solar storm season." Chen leaned back in her chair. "Jake, you're the best mechanic I've ever worked with. You've kept this station running when by all rights we should have had catastrophic failures months ago. But you're also showing signs of burnout that could put the entire crew at risk." "I'm fine," Jake protested, though even he could hear the exhaustion in his own voice. "No, you're not. Yesterday you fell asleep standing up while working on the air recycling unit. Chief Medical Officer Reynolds is concerned about your health, and frankly, so am I." Chun's expression softened slightly. "Look, Jake, I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to help you. You need a break, whether you want one or not." Jake ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of 18 months of accumulated fatigue. "Fine, I'll take a long weekend. Maybe catch up on some reading. Not good enough. I'm ordering you to take 2 weeks of mandatory leave, effective immediately. And before you argue, the decision is final. 2 weeks. Commander, this station will fall apart without me." Chen smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Jake, you're good, but you're not irreplaceable. We managed to keep stations running before you arrived, and we'll manage while you're gone. Besides, Engineer Patel has been begging for a chance to prove herself. This will be good experience for her." Jake wanted to argue further, but he could see the determination in Chun's eyes. When she made up her mind about something, that was the end of the discussion. "Fine, but I'm staying on Europa. I'll just take it easy around here." "Absolutely not. You'll spend the entire 2 weeks finding excuses to wander into the maintenance bays. I've already arranged for you to take a transport to Titan. There's a nice resort there, and the ice caves are supposed to be spectacular." "Titan, Commander, that's a 4-day journey each way. That's more than half my leave time spent traveling, which is exactly the point. You need to get away from here completely. The transport leaves in 6 hours, and I've already had someone. Pack your things. Jake stood up, resignation settling over him like a heavy blanket. You're not going to change your mind about this, are you? Not a chance. Go get some rest, Jake. That's an order. The journey to Titan passed in a blur of hyperspace jumps and long periods of boredom. Jake spent most of the time reading technical manuals on his tablet, much to the amusement of the other passengers. The transport was a sleek passenger liner that catered to tourists and business travelers, a far cry from the utilitarian design of Europa Station. When they finally arrived at Titan, Jake was struck by the beauty of the moon's surface. The methane lakes reflected the pale light of distant Saturn, and the thick atmosphere created an otherworldly orange glow. New Geneva, the main settlement, was a cluster of domed buildings connected by enclosed walkways. It was larger than Europa Station, but still small enough that Jake could walk from one end to the other in about 20 minutes. The resort where Commander Chen had booked him was called the Titan Grand, though grand was probably an overstatement. It was comfortable enough, with clean rooms and decent food, but it was clearly designed for tourists who wanted to experience the frontier without any actual danger or discomfort. Jake checked in and immediately felt out of place. The other guests were families on vacation, couples celebrating anniversaries, and groups of friends looking for adventure. Everyone seemed to be having a good time, laughing and talking about their plans for exploring the local attractions. First time on Titan? Asked the clerk at the front desk. A cheerful woman in her 30s, with the kind of smile that suggested she'd asked this question thousands of times before. Yeah, Jake replied, signing the registration tablet. I'm here for the ice caves. I guess, oh, you'll love them. They're absolutely spectacular. The formations are thousands of years old, and some of the chambers are large enough to hold a small spacecraft. We have guided tours leaving every few hours. Or you can rent equipment and explore on your own if you're feeling adventurous. Jake wasn't particularly feeling adventurous, but the idea of a guided tour with a group of chattering tourists didn't appeal to him either. I'll take the solo equipment rental. When can I start? Right now, if you'd like. The caves are open 24 hours, though I'd recommend going during the day shift when the lighting is better. An hour later, Jake found himself suited up in a thermal protection suit and carrying a backpack full of safety equipment. The cave entrance was a short walk from the resort, marked by a small building that housed the rental equipment and safety briefing area. The caves themselves were indeed spectacular. The ice formations created natural sculptures that would have been impossible to create artificially. Jake found himself actually relaxing for the first time in months as he wandered through the passages, his footsteps echoing softly in the vast chambers. It was in the third chamber that he noticed something odd. His suit's sensors were picking up electromagnetic readings that didn't match the background radiation he'd expect from natural ice formations. Jake paused, frowning at the display on his wrist. The readings were definitely artificial in origin, but they were coming from deeper in the cave system, beyond the normal tourist routes. He should have turned back. The sensible thing to do would have been to report the anomalous readings to the cave management and let them investigate. But Jake had never been particularly sensible when it came to interesting technical problems. He followed the electromagnetic signature deeper into the cave system, using his suit's mapping function to keep track of his location. The passages became narrower and more twisted, clearly not part of the regular tour route. The ice formations here were different too. Less decorative and more purposeful. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, Jake found himself standing at the edge of a vast underground chamber. His suit's lights illuminated the space, revealing something that made him stop breathing for a moment. Embedded in the ice at the far end of the chamber was a structure that was clearly artificial. It was enormous, easily the size of a small building, with smooth curves and angles that suggested advanced engineering. But it was the material that caught Jake's attention. The whole plating was made of some kind of metal that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways. Jake approached the structure carefully, his engineer's mind racing. This was definitely a spacecraft, but it was unlike anything in his experience. The design was elegant and alien, with flowing lines that seemed to follow principles of physics he didn't fully understand. He reached out to touch the hull, and his hand passed through what appeared to be solid ice, as if it were water. The ice was some kind of stasis field, he realized, keeping the ship in perfect preservation. Jake stepped through the field and found himself standing on the ship's hull. There was an airlock near what appeared to be the front of the vessel. Jake examined it closely, noting the strange symbols carved around the frame. They weren't from any human language, but they had a purposeful quality that suggested they were more than mere decoration. His suit's sensors detected atmosphere on the other side of the airlock, though the composition was unusual, high oxygen content, but with trace gases he didn't recognize. Jake made a decision that would have horrified his safety instructors back on Europa Station. He activated the airlock. The door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a corridor that glowed with its own internal light. The walls were covered in the same flowing script Jake had seen on the outside, but here the symbols seemed to pulse with energy. He stepped inside, and the airlock sealed behind him. The corridor led to what was obviously a command center. Banks of controls lined the walls, their surfaces covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the room stood a pedestal supporting what appeared to be a crystalline structure about the size of Jake's head. As he approached the crystal, it began to glow brighter. Jake reached out to touch it, and the moment his fingers made contact, the entire room erupted in light. When his vision cleared, he was no longer alone. Standing before him was a figure that was humanoid, but clearly not human. It was tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and features that seemed to shift and flow like water. Its skin had a translucent quality, and its eyes were large and dark, filled with an intelligence that was both ancient and alien. "You are not of the Zephyrian race," the figure said, its voice echoing strangely in Jake's mind rather than his ears. "Yet you have activated the awakening protocol. How is this possible?" Jake swallowed hard, trying to process what was happening. "I'm human. I'm from Europa Station. I was just exploring the caves and found your ship." The figure tilted its head, studying Jake with those enormous eyes. "Human, the young race from the third planet. You have progressed further than we anticipated. I am Keeper Anaris, guardian of the sleepers." Sleepers, the last of our people, held in stasis while we waited for rescue that never came. We are the progenitors, the ancestors of those you call Zephyrians. Our world died long ago, and we fled to the stars carrying the seeds of our civilization. Jake's mind reeled. The Zephyrians were an advanced alien race that humans had made. Contact with only 50 years ago, they were peaceful traders and had shared some of their technology with humanity. But this ship predated known Zephyrian civilization by thousands of years, How long have you been here? Jake asked. By your measurement of time, approximately 12,000 years. Our ship was damaged in the journey, and we sought refuge in this ice moon to effect repairs. But the damage was too extensive, and we were forced to enter stasis to preserve life while the ship's systems maintained minimal function. And you've been waiting here ever since. Keeper Anaris nodded sadly, waiting for someone with the knowledge and skills to restore our systems. The ship's AI has been monitoring for signs of advanced technology, but until now, no one has come who possessed the necessary understanding. Jake looked around the command center, taking in the alien technology with new eyes. It was incredibly advanced, but he could see the underlying engineering principles, different from human technology, but not incomprehensible. What kind of repairs do you need? He asked. The quantum stasis field generators that preserve our people are failing. Without them, the sleepers will die. We estimate less than one of your days before complete system failure. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ice caves. Thousands of lives hung in the balance, and he was just a mechanic from Europa Station. But as he looked at the desperate hope in Keeper Anaris's eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away. Show me the systems, he said. Let's see what we can do. Human ingenuity saves an ancient civilization. Keeper Anaris led Jake through the ship's corridors, past chambers filled with crystalline pods that glowed with a soft, pulsing light. Inside each pod, Jake could see the shadowy outline of a sleeping figure. The progenitors looked similar to Anaris, but smaller and more delicate, like flowers preserved in amber. 50,000 souls, Anaris said quietly, the last survivors of our civilization. Scientists, artists, children, philosophers, they carry within them the accumulated knowledge of 1,000,000 years of culture. Jake stopped counting the pods. After the first few hundred, the ship was enormous, far larger than it had appeared from the outside. The corridors seemed to twist and fold in ways that defied conventional geometry, suggesting technology that manipulated space itself. They arrived at the engineering section, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The quantum stasis generators were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Crystalline structures the size of buildings pulsed with energy that seemed to bend reality around them. But even Jake's untrained eye could see the problems. Cracks spiderwebbed through several of the main crystals, and the harmonic resonance was clearly unstable. The cosmic radiation, Anaris explained, gesturing to the damaged systems. Over 12 millennia, it has slowly degraded the quantum matrix. We shielded as best we could, but our materials were not designed for such extended exposure. Jake walked around the generators, his engineer's mind cataloging the damage. It was extensive, but not necessarily fatal. The underlying principles were similar to quantum field manipulation technology he'd worked with, just orders of magnitude more advanced. Do you have spare parts? Replacement crystals? The manufacturing systems failed 3,000 years ago. We have been using what reserves remained, but they are exhausted. Jake nodded, pulling out his tablet and scanning the damaged crystals with its sensors. The readings were unlike anything in his database, but he could see patterns in the energy. Signatures. What happens if the stasis field fails? The sleepers will age 12,000 years in moments. They will die, and with them, the knowledge they carry. And if we try to wake them up before fixing the generators, the same result. The quantum field must be stabilized first, or any attempt to end the stasis will be fatal. Jake studied the readouts on his tablet, an idea beginning to form in his mind. It was crazy, probably impossible, but it might work. I need to go back to the surface. There are some things I need to get. Anaris looked concerned. You will return. I'm not going anywhere until this is fixed, Jake said firmly. But I need equipment that's not on your ship. The journey back to the surface felt like it took forever, though Jake's suit chronometer showed only 2 hours had passed. He burst into the rental office like a man possessed, startling the clerk behind the counter. I need to contact the mining operation, Jake said breathlessly. Emergency technical consultation. The clerk blinked in confusion. Sir, the caves are perfectly safe. If you got lost, we can send a guide to not the caves. I need to speak with the chief engineer at the methane processing plant. Right now. 20 minutes later, Jake was in a video conference with Maria Santos, the chief engineer for Titan Industrial Operations. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the no-nonsense attitude that came from years of keeping complex machinery running in hostile environments. You want to borrow what? She asked, staring at Jake through the screen. A portable fusion welder, 6 meters of superconducting cable, and all the quantum field generators you can spare. It's for an emergency repair job on Titan. What could possibly require that level of equipment? Our operation is running fine. Jake hesitated. He couldn't exactly explain about the ancient alien ship without sounding completely insane. It's single quotes us ... complicated. But if I don't get this equipment, a lot of people are going to die. Something in Jake's voice must have convinced her, because Maria's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. Are you talking about a life support failure at the resort? Something like that. Maria, I know how this sounds, but I'm a certified level 5 engineer with Europa Station. Check my credentials. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. Maria was quiet for a moment, presumably running Jake's certification through the system. When she looked back at the screen, her attitude had changed completely. Your service record says you've performed 17 emergency repairs that prevented catastrophic failures. That's impressive. I need that equipment, Maria, please. It'll take me 2 hours to get everything together. But Jake, if this is some kind of joke or publicity stunt, I'll personally space you from the nearest airlock. It's not a joke. Thank you. Jake spent the waiting time researching quantum field theory on his tablet, trying to understand the principles behind progenitor technology. The math was complex, but the basic concepts were sound. Energy fields that existed partially outside normal space-time, creating pockets of altered physics where different rules apply. When Maria arrived with the equipment, Jake was surprised to see she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a tall, elegant figure that Jake recognized as a Zephyrian. The alien's skin had a silver sheen, and its large eyes regarded Jake with obvious suspicion. This is Ambassador Zethka, Maria explained. When I mentioned your equipment request, he became very interested. Apparently, quantum field manipulation is considered dangerous technology by his people. Zethka stepped forward, its voice carrying the melodic quality typical of Zephyrian speech. Human engineer, you work with forces that could unmake reality itself. What purpose drives you to such dangerous endeavors? Jake looked at the Zephyrian, remembering what Keeper Anaris had told him about the relationship between the progenitors. And modern Zephorians, I'm trying to save lives. That's all I can tell you right now. Lives of whom? There are no settlements on Titan that would require such extreme measures. I can't explain without showing you, but if you want to come along, you're welcome to see for yourself. Zethka exchanged a look with Maria, then nodded slowly. Very well, but if you endanger others with reckless experimentation, I will intervene. The journey back to the ice caves was tense. Maria peppered Jake with questions about the emergency, while Zethka remained ominously silent. Jake deflected as best he could, knowing that the truth would sound impossible until they saw it with their own eyes. When they reached the chamber, where the progenitor ship waited, both of his companions stopped in stunned silence. The vessel's elegant curves and impossible materials were even more impressive with the portable lighting equipment Maria had brought. By the eternal light, Zethka whispered, "This is a progenitor vessel, but that's impossible. They are myth, legend, stories told to children, not myth," Jake said, leading them through the ice stasis field. "Your ancestors, and they're dying." The meeting between Zethka and Keeper Anares was emotional in a way that transcended species. The modern Zephyrian fell to his knees before the ancient progenitor, speaking in a language that sounded like music. Anaris responded in kind, placing a translucent hand on Zethka's head in what was clearly a gesture of blessing. "He says that stories are true," Zethka translated, tears streaming down his face. "The progenitors did flee the dying homeworld. They carry within them the true history of our people, knowledge that was lost in the great catastrophe. And they'll all die if we don't fix the stasis generators in the next 18 hours, Jake said grimly. "So let's get to work." What followed was the most intensive repair job of Jake's career. The quantum field generators were failing in complex cascade patterns that required constant adjustment. Jake worked with the fusion welder, carefully repairing crystal matrices, while Maria managed power distribution and Zethka served as translator between Jake and Anaris. The work was dangerous. Several times, quantum fields fluctuated wildly, threatening to tear holes in space-time itself. Jake's hands were steady despite the exhaustion, guided by instincts honed through years of emergency repairs. He couldn't fully understand the technology he was working with, but he could feel its patterns, its rhythms. "The harmonic resonance is stabilizing," Anaris reported after Jake finished welding a support brace around one of the larger crystals. "But the cascade failure continues in Sector 7. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead, looking at the massive generator array. They'd been working for 12 hours straight, and he was running out of both time and materials. The portable equipment from the mining operation was barely adequate for the scale of repairs needed. "We need more power," he said finally. "The generators are trying to re-establish equilibrium, but they don't have enough energy to complete the stabilization process." "The ship's power core is already at maximum output," Anaris replied. "We cannot provide more energy without risking total system failure." Jake stared at the quantum generators, his tired mind racing. There had to be a solution. There was always a solution if you looked at the problem from the right angle. Then it hit him. "We don't need more power. We need to change how the power is distributed." He turned to Maria. "Your mining operation uses a distributed power grid to handle fluctuating loads, right?" "Of course. We can't predict when a methane pocket will require extra processing power, so we built redundancy into the system." "What if we could tap into that grid, not to draw power from it, but to use it as a stabilizing buffer?" Maria frowned. "You want to connect alien technology to our power grid? That's insane. Not connect directly. We create a feedback loop using the quantum field generators themselves. They're already manipulating space-time on a local level. If we can expand that field to encompass your power grid, we can use the grid stability to anchor the quantum fluctuations." Zethka looked horrified. "Human engineer, such a connection could affect the entire moon." The consequences would be unpredictable. The consequences of doing nothing are 50,000 deaths, Jake shot back. I'm willing to take the risk. It took another 6 hours to implement Jake's plan. Using the superconducting cable from the mining operation, they created a connection between the ship's quantum generators and Titan's power infrastructure. The mathematics were beyond complex, requiring Jake to jury-rig systems that had never been designed to work together. As the connection went live, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The quantum fields fluctuated wildly for several terrifying moments before suddenly stabilizing at levels higher than they'd been in millennia. Impossible, Anaris breathed, staring at the readings. The quantum matrix is not merely stable, it is regenerating. Jake collapsed against a bulkhead, exhaustion finally overwhelming him. Did we do it? Are the sleepers safe? More than safe, Anaris replied, wonder evident in its voice. The connection you've created has somehow reversed thousands of years of decay. The stasis fields are stronger now than when we first entered them. Over the next few hours, as the progenitor ship's systems fully stabilized, Jake learned the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. The quantum field connection hadn't just saved the sleepers. It had created a permanent link between progenitor technology and human infrastructure that would revolutionize both civilizations. The first sleepers began awakening within days, emerging from 12,000 years of suspended animation with their memories and knowledge intact. They brought with them scientific principles that would advance human technology by centuries, along with art, philosophy, and culture that enriched both human and Zephyrian societies. Jake found himself at the center of a diplomatic and scientific revolution. Representatives from Earth, Mars, Europa, and a dozen Zephyrian worlds came to Titan to witness the awakening of the progenitors. But through it all, Jake remained focused on what had driven him from the beginning, making sure the technology worked properly. 6 months later, Jake stood in the same ice chamber where he'd first found the progenitor ship. But now it was no longer buried in ice. The vessel had been carefully extracted and converted into a cultural center where humans and Zephyrians could study progenitor knowledge together. You never did finish your vacation, Commander Chen said, joining him at the observation deck overlooking the ship. She'd come to Titan for the formal dedication ceremony, along with representatives from throughout human space. I think I'm okay with that, Jake replied. This was better than any vacation I could have imagined. The Council of Worlds has approved the new position, Chief Engineer of Interspecies Technology Integration, based here on Titan. It's yours if you want it. Jake looked at the progenitor ship, where human and Zephyrian engineers worked side by side, learning from each other and from the awakened progenitors. It was exactly the kind of impossible repair job he'd always dreamed of, one that would never truly be finished. I'll take it, he said, but I want it in my contract that I don't have to take mandatory vacation time. Chen laughed. Jake, after what you've accomplished here, I think you've earned the right to work as much as you want. Just promise me you'll eat regular meals. As the ceremony began below, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd started as a mechanic who just wanted to fix things and keep them running. But sometimes he'd learned fixing things meant changing everything. The universe was full of impossible problems waiting for someone stubborn enough to refuse to give up. And Jake Martinez, the mechanic who wouldn't quit, was exactly the kind of person who could solve them.